enjoy this and watch our Facebook page and the monthly updates that Matt sends out that are so wonderful for upcoming educational events like that. Either Mark will do some, we may have some others, and we also have our annual meeting happening on March 20th. So put it on your calendar. There may be an educational component to that, as well as the new executive director of TPE will be there with us, I believe, and she will be giving a short presentation as well. Okay, without further ado, Mark, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I want to welcome everybody. I'm a little nervous because I tend to be a klutz around gadgets and gadgetry, and I have two screens here, which I'm not used to, and so I'll probably do something wrong, but I will try not to. So what I wanted to take the opportunity today to show you some of the data that I've been collecting at our sites. So that's partly my excuse today, but we don't look at our projects through the lens of data very often. Now I'm already confused. Let's see here. So everybody can see the slideshow. Is it worth the effort? Now let's see.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, so the obligatory, I want to give a whole bunch of thanks. I mean, the Prairie Enthusiasts is an amazing group of people. And this chart here shows how many acres of land have been protected by the Prairie Enthusiasts, and this is out of date. That line just keeps going up, and there's going to be some very significant land purchases and more easements coming up this year. Our chapter has none of those yet, but maybe someday we will. And the sites I'm going to talk about today, I got to thank the Eau Claire County Parks, the Eau Claire Gun Club, very important organization here, the Dunn County Alliance of Sport and Conservation Groups. We've been getting grants from the Fish and Wildlife Service. I've gotten some of the data I'm going to show was helped sponsored by the National Science Foundation. The Wisconsin DNR has provided us money. And God, thank you that there are still herbaria where you can take your unknown plant specimens and have somebody who's smarter than you about these plants say, oh, it's not that, it's this. Okay, I am having a little trouble here already. This next slide, just to give a little background on the Prairie Enthusiasts. This is the geography of the entire organization and the Chippewa Savannah area. Oh, can I use the mouse? Sort of. Well, anyway, you can see this part of Wisconsin. So the sites I'm going to talk about are here. So I've already given a little bit of background about the Prairie Enthusiasts. I'm going to talk very briefly about the techniques we use for identifying highly restorable sites. And then mostly I'm going to be talking about the techniques for assessing their quality. I'm focusing just on plants today. You know, that's enough. If we start talking about birds and insects, that's entirely another set of talks. But the question is, how do we know whether our efforts are really improving and maintaining the quality of the vegetation at these sites? So I'm going to be focusing on 3 sites. One's Dobbs Landing, one's what we call the Seymour Project, and one is Karl Moorsbach complex of prairies and savannas. And then we're going to, I'll try not to blab on too long. but Pam Mar might want to hit her mute
Yeah,
button.
hey, I'm gonna have to call you back. I'm in a meeting.
Hold on a
And
second,
I'll
Mark.
call you later.
Pam, everybody, could you mute yourself so that whatever is happening in your background will not interfere with our talk today? Pam, could you mute yourself?
I think that's Kathy.
Oh, I'm not muted?
No. Anybody who's not muted, could you mute yourself? Thanks so much. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, and if I don't blab on too long and you don't get all too tired, hopefully we'll have some time for some good discussion at the end of this. So let me continue on here. I don't know how many of you seen this book that came out several years ago, The Vanishing Present. I just want to read 2 sentences out of it by John Magnuson, John Magnuson, I should say, the limnologist, who's done a lot of work on climate change and the effects on lakes. And he said that quantitatively, our sense of change is usually just plain wrong. I mean, just in our lifetimes, we don't have a very good recollection of how things used to be. And then the next generation doesn't have that recollection at all. So we can recall the past and sense change only when we keep records. And I keep records of the prairie sites that we're working on, not as much as I think I should. And there's not enough people who really can identify plants very well. We're not doing as good a job on this throughout the prairie enthusiasts as we should. So the basic thing is to make a plant species list for each site. And then the quantitative method is to use some sort of plot. This picture, that looks like a rectangular plot. Everything I'm going to be talking about today that involves some sort of plot, I may call it a quadrat. That's our jargon for it. It'll be 1 meter by 1 meter. So what we want to know is the status or the quality of the vegetation. And what we have are the plants themselves. So how do we go from the plants themselves to being able to say something about the status or the quality? So there's only some things we can measure. Making a species list is one. Identifying all the plants that are above that rectangle would be another way of doing it. And that way you get a better idea of how abundant a species is or how much coverage it has throughout the site. So you get some sort of relative abundance figures from that. But of course, there's all kinds of errors involved, and I'm using errors in kind of the statistical sense here that you might miss something. I'm not as good at identifying all the plants as I used to, and I have a stack of plants that haven't made it to the herbarium yet to be identified. But I can use those species lists. I can use the quantitative data collected from those plots and use some mathematical formulas and come up with indices. So there may be some more errors between my computer entry, my mathematics, my losing things to get to the index. And the index is just, well, it's an index. It's not really telling us what the quality is. It's giving us some indication of what the quality is. So not that I'm trying to make this sound like it's all hopeless. I just want to make the point that this isn't precision like in fine automobile engineering or something. There's a lot of space for imprecision, but that's okay. So I'm going to move into a little section here where, which is based on a number of different studies, and to save time, I'm not going to talk about all of them or tell you who did them or all that. Some of them I did, but through these studies, we know that a third of the native plant species in Wisconsin are declining, and a number of them are declining severely. So it's really important that we, as the prairie enthusiasts, get this right so we can protect these species that are in decline. A number of the studies that I've been involved in made use of data collected by other scientists early in the 20th century. And so I and other people have gone back to the same sites, collected the same sort of data, and we've been finding that species losses are not just random. There's certain groups of species that are disappearing much more quickly than other ones, even in our better prairie remnants, even where there's still prairie sod. So nitrogen fixers are amongst the groups that seem to be disappearing quickly. Maybe we can talk, if we have time later, I can speculate on why that is. But now I just want to point out that there's certain groups that are in trouble. Here's a graph that I never got around to publishing, but based on 74 sites that were sampled twice, about 50 years apart between the sampling. And I don't know, how many of you are familiar with the coefficient of conservatism, this idea that every native plant species can be given a number based on its fidelity to a remnant of the original vegetation? A few people are. Sometimes I just, for simplicity, like to call it the most conservative species are the habitat specialist or the most finicky species. So this graph shows that it has the most specialist species, like that yellow stargrass that's down in the corner on the right-hand side, and the more generalist species like that fleabane that you might find growing anywhere on the left-hand side. And over 50 years, no surprise, but even within our prairie remnants, the generalists became more common, the specialists have been disappearing. Any questions so far? Another thing that we've learned, and this is sort of a classic thing that conservation biologists have figured out half a century ago, that bigger is better. The bigger your area that you're managing, the bigger your preserve is, the more species are going to survive there. That's really important with our prairie remnants because so many are so small that we really need to do the best we can to protect the largest of them as we can now. We've also learned, and again, this is from actual data from re-studies, is that our best management tools are, the single best management tool is prescribed fire, and accompanying that in areas where fire has been absent for a long time, a lot of undesired trees and shrubs will grow up, and basically just getting in there and doing the grunt work of cutting them out is really important. And so here's a photo of Pam Marr, who I see on my screen right now, carrying a drip torch across what we call the Triangle Prairie at the Seymour Project in Eau Claire. Another thing that we do selectively is we spread seeds. Not every spot in every place that we want to protect is in really good shape. There's bare spots. Here at the Dobbs Landing site, I'm going to talk more of. For years, and we're still having a problem with that, a lot of people thought it was a great place to go off-roading. And so there's a lot of disturbance from vehicles and ruts. We have a similar problem at the Seymour Project. So I mentioned these projects. But I figured I ought to tell you where they are. If you can see here, maybe this isn't so clear, but here's Menominee, here's Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls. Here's the Eau Claire River going down. Dobbs Landing is just west of the little town of Colfax, right on the Red Cedar River. The Seymour project is an area just east of Eau Claire in the township of Seymour, and Carl Moorsbach's ranch, his farm, is down here. If any of you are down by the little town of Ella, if any of you ever taken the Tiffany train ride, we often take a stop and we point across the river and say, if you can see that little bald spot on the side of that hill, that's Carl Moorsbach's amazing goat prairie. Those other red spots are some of the other places that we've either worked on in the past or work on occasionally, or the private landowner is a member and they work on it, and sometimes we have work parties to help them out too. But these three sites, Dobbs Landing, Seymour Project, and Carl Moorsbach's, I'm going to be focusing on a little bit. So, well, I think I'm starting out here with a slide out of order already, but this is what we're calling the Oxbow Remnant on Dobbs Landing. And in 2015, I think it was, the Alliance of Conservation Groups in Dunn County bought this, and the prairie enthusiasts are part of that group, and we are the ones with the knowledge on restoring natural areas. And this area, the Oxbow, the first time I went out there, I started finding some of the important plant species that we're looking for. Sorry, that slide, I thought I moved that into the right location, but here gives an overview for those of you who know Dobbs Landing. There's 4 sites I'm going to mention within the property. This little snaky line going across here is the Red Cedar River. This Oxbow area that I just showed, there's an old Oxbow wetland that goes around it. That was a very overgrown jack pine barrens with a lot of dead jack pines in it, a lot of scrub oak, about a 90% canopy. This little tiny area here, I call it the lot barrens. It's one we don't really pay much attention to. We haven't really done much management in there, but what we've done has made a difference, and I'll show you that. There's another area here that I call the landing prairie because the boat landing of Dobbs Landing is right next to it. And finally, in contrast, there's the southeast old field that basically is not something that I would consider taking on as a natural area. But since we've got this whole property and we could get money for seeds, we've been throwing seeds there. But I'm going to use that basically as an outlier when we look at the data. The Seymour project east of Eau Claire, there's 3 areas I'm going to talk about. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this spot. There's Phillips County Park is nearby. Down at the bottom here is the Eau Claire River. And this green area is where the Eau Claire Gun Club does their dog trials. There's a little spot up here that we call Hidden Lupin, and a couple, I don't know, maybe it's 3-acre spot here we call the Triangle because that's what shape it is. And I'll tell you more about these in a couple minutes. And then finally, Carl Moorsbach's place, he has the potential of probably 250 acres of high quality savanna and prairie. And so far, the management has mostly just been on his existing goat prairie and moving back the edges of it some, but there's some local prairie enthusiasts and friends of Carl's that have been doing a lot of chainsaw work out there. They also had a major blowdown from a storm a couple years ago, which was really helping open up some of these areas, making it extremely difficult to get around in some of these areas. But so I will be presenting some information about Carl's site as well. So when I get asked, or any of the other members of the prairie enthusiasts get asked to go to a property and the question might be, is this worthy of restoration? Is there enough good stuff left here? Does it look like there's original prairie and oak savanna sod? And there's usually at least two things that I look for first. One is just a high diversity of native plants. And the second thing is some of those finicky species, some of those species that just seem to be found in original prairie sod and don't move around very much. So one that I really wasn't very familiar with until I moved to this area is that green milkweed. And surprisingly, it's at Carl Moorsbach's, it's at Dobbs Landing, and it's at Seymour. And I don't know any other place it's growing around here. So if you see this plant, it's got these tough, kind of lancy leaves that are usually quite wavy on this end. And when I see one, I see one. I look around and I don't find another one. So I'm really interested in knowing if there's more of these around. Another plant that happens at all three of those sites, and it's another good indicator of original prairie sod, is the prairie smoke, shown down in the left-hand corner. But the one I really like to find around here is that tuffy grass, that northern dropseed. And not only does that not move around very much, it pretty much stays put. It's very sensitive to grazing. So any site that's had the cattle or the horses on it a little too much, it's gone. It's interesting that some of the best restorations in the state, you can find the dropseed just over where the fence line used to be, where the cattle couldn't reach it. And it's slowly moving now into the rest of the prairie sod where it got grazed out. So those are some of the plants that we look for. So here's the first of, I'm afraid, too many tables I'm going to show you, but this is the number of what I call the fickle species that are found in some of these sites. And by fickle, for those of you familiar with the C value, the coefficient of conservatism, these are the 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. So I didn't even have a picture of that southeast Oldfield, but there's not much out there except a lot of weeds, but there happen to be two fickle species. One happened to be Selaginella, a little fern ally that's about this big. At Dobbs in the Oxbow, there's 12. That's a pretty good number. At the boat landing area, there's 10. That's pretty good. At the Seymour Dog Trial, there's 11. At the Seymour Triangle, there's 17. At the Hidden Lupin site, there's only 3. So the reason why we're interested in the hidden lupin site is at that site, we like any place that has lupin in it because there used to be Karner blue butterflies there that are entirely dependent on lupin. And we want to restore enough patches of lupin that we can reintroduce, or maybe Pam Mara is really hoping that there's still Karners there and they'll make a comeback. So that's why we like that site, even though it doesn't have so many fickle species in it. And then look at Karl Morsbach, 23. Do I get excited about fickle species? I do. So one of the things that I've been interested in is trying to really figure out what are the better indices for deciding the quality of these sites. And so since I've had this opportunity to resample a number of sites that had been sampled 50 years earlier, I thought I had an objective way of comparing quality indices and basically making the assumption that the sites that are the most similar to the way they were 50 years ago, or haven't shown evidence of degradation, those are going to be really good sites and their indicator scores ought to be high. And so I graded numerous different indices that people had been using. The one that the agencies seem to really have bought into is the Floristic Quality Index, which I gave a B- to. There are ways to improve on that a little bit, but I think some of these other ways are better. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. The ones I gave A+ to, I'm gonna give the results for those. One, as I call the Alpha Diversity Index. It's just the number of native species per square meter. So I'm using that Quadrat data I collected. Another really good one is I call the Gamma Diversity Index. If I lay out that 1 square meter and collect the data 20 different times, that list for those 20 quadrats is the number of native species per those 21 square meter quadrats, and that gives me the gamma diversity. The Bowles-Jones Index combines those two, and I think this is a really good one. It just multiplies that alpha, the number of native species per square meter, times the natural log of the gamma. How many of you have used your natural logs this week? Nobody. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Floristic Quality Index in a minute. So this Floristic Quality Index, which I just gave a B- to, that C value, those numbers given to every native plant that go from 0 to 10, with the most finicky getting the 10 and the weediest ones getting a 0, you take the mean of all those on your species list for the site, multiply that by the square root of the total number of species. And that gives you the FQI. And so let's take a look. That Oldfield, the Floristic Quality Index was 11.2, by far the smallest number of any of them. Take a look at the very bottom, Karl Morsbach's 46.7. The best of the group, the Seymour Triangle, 44.6. The rest of them, between 25 and 40 or so. According to Jerry Wilhelm of Floyd Swink and Jerry Wilhelm, who came up with the system in the first place, they suggest that a Floristic Quality Index has to be at least 35 to be considered even something that you might work on for its natural area quality. They developed this in the Chicago area. They might have been a little pickier than us, I'm not sure. But anyway, you can see some of these are above 35. Even the ones that are below 35 aren't really that far below, except the one that we knew was going to be a dud, the old field. Is this making sense to people? So let's look at the 3 A+ indices. So now these involve the Quadrat data, and I didn't have Quadrat data for the Seymour Gun Club dog trial area or for Mooresbox. And so I just don't have those. But God, I'm even forgetting what that stands for, the NRA, the Natural Something Index. And I just am getting a warning that my internet is unstable. So if I disappear, I'll get back on as quickly as I can. But here we have, again, the triangle at Seymour being the highest value. Also, but not the highest value for the gamma. And since this gamma incorporates both the diversity at a square meter and the diversity over a large area, it's really quite sensitive to the variation within a site. So that Oxbow area, it's a savanna, and you have some quadrats that are going to be in the shade underneath a tree. You're going to get more forest kind of species. Other places you're going to get very dry prairie species. And so that gamma value is kind of biased for plants that are heterogeneous. They're not the same throughout the site. But also this alpha diversity, just the average number of species per square meter, these are not bad figures. I mean, it's rare that I find places where the average is 12. So getting close to 10 is pretty darn good. I know there's some kind of communities where you'll get higher numbers, but prairies and oak savannas and pine barrens, that seems pretty good. So anyway, a bunch of numbers, and I'm not really saying that these mean anything other than comparing that some are better than others. So what I want to do now is show you how some of these sites have changed over time, because this is where the numbers get more interesting. So this area at the Dobbs Landing site that I call the lot prairie, I call it that because it's next to the parking lot, and we don't really have a name for it, and I made that up this week. And we really haven't done a whole lot of management on this site, except Kathy Stahl in particular really went after it for knapweed control. Knapweed is an invasive species that makes it difficult for many other species to get the nitrogen they need out of the soil. And this site in 2015 and 2015, before Kathy Stahl started going after it, the two most common plants there were knapweed and daisy fleabane. Fleabane, for some reason, isn't bothered, but a native species, but not fickle at all. It's kind of a weedy species. So as you can see here, I show that the percent knapweed coverage in just a single year went from 30% to 6.4%. And this is really what surprised me. I did not expect this at all, is that the number of native species in that site went from, that I could find anyway, that I could identify, went from 37 to 49. That's a substantial increase in 1 year. The floristic quality index went from 20.6 to 26.3. The number of species per square meter went from 5.2 to 6.5. It would be higher there, except we still have a problem with people driving over the site. So, and it's basically just like sand and gravel. So there's not much holding it together when somebody drives over it. We since then have started throwing seeds over that site, but that's not included in these data here. The gamma diversity went up and the NRA went up considerably. So this tells me that it's really worth the effort to go after that knapweed. This surprises me that there could be this much change in 1 year. So that Oxbow site was the site that first got me interested, really interested in Dobbs Landing, because there were patches of prairie sod that were full of that northern dropseed grass, and then prairie violets, another very finicky species. So here's two samples that are 3 years apart. In between that time, the tree canopy went from being about a 90% canopy to being about a 20% canopy. So we really opened up the site. I confess that when I collected that 2015 data, I might not have done the best job, because it's really hard to collect good data when your plot ends up in the middle of prickly ash thicket, which majority of that site was. It was nasty trying to work in there. I kept getting poked in the eye and ripped open, but I think it's pretty good data. So the number of species, maybe I missed some just because it's hard to see when it's that brushy, but that increased from 58 to 87. The floristic quality index, I don't know if this is significant or not, but it jumped above that threshold of 35 that Jerry Wilhelms says is kind of the minimum for a natural area site. Alpha went up, gamma went up quite a bit, and the NRI went up quite a bit. So I think our management there has really made a difference. We've been going in since 2018 and throwing seeds in the areas that were that didn't have very many native species into it. There also was a fair amount of rutting done by some of the logging equipment that was in there, and we've seeded into that. And so I'm thinking the next time I collect data out there, these numbers are all gonna be even higher. So over the Seymour project, the Triangle area is an odd little site. It's got a paved road on one side, it's got a road that goes down to a boat landing on another side, and then it's got the Renegade ATV off-road mess going down near the other edge. And it's got, on one edge, it's got a canopy of jack pine and Hills oak and some other things. So it's got a little shade variation in it, but it also has two power lines going over it, and the power lines have always been brushed. And so part of the reason why this site is so rich is that it never got invaded by so many trees and brush as other places have at Seymour or at Dodge Landing. So we haven't done a whole lot of management out there. We did one burn, but it was before the first sampling here. That was that picture of Pam with the drip torch. So I find these numbers astounding. Going from 47 native species to 88, 3 years, I mean, these years after a single fire, I don't know if I can explain this. The FQI, the Floristic Quality Index, went from slightly above Jerry Wilhelm's cutoff to way above his cutoff, 44.6. The number of species per square meter went up, and this gamma went up quite a bit, and so did this NRI went up quite a bit. Again, we've done some pest control there. There was some, and still is some knapweed, but it never was nearly as thick as it was at that Dodge Landing site. There was a little bit of buckthorn. We've taken that out. I don't know if this can just be a trajectory from doing one fire through there. I don't know. I'm a little not sure how this continued to keep getting so much better. I know that one fire removed a lot of duff, and maybe that's the difference. So is it, to get back to the original question, has it been worth the effort? I would say, collecting data on the vegetation itself, doing the simple analysis shows that we are protecting sites that are worthy of protection and that our management is making a significant improvement in them. So that's all I have to say. With the slides, I'm going to, well, I won't turn them off because maybe somebody wants to me to go back to a slide, but I would like to open this up for questions and conversations. And I do want to make a plug for helping us do this. We have more opportunities than we have people power to take care of these sites, and there's more sites that we would like to be taking care of, and then we would like to be taking care of these sites more aggressively. So anyway, Carol Jean, are you going to monitor the questions here? Is that how we're going to do this?
Sure. If you have a question, you can raise your hand in your picture, or you can use the little symbol in the reactions. If you see at the bottom of your screen, there's a little thing that says reactions. Okay. Is that a question from the person named Bradley? Or are you just adjusting your screen, maybe?
I was just adjusting my screen.
Okay, no problem. Anybody have a question? Okay, William, go ahead.
It's not really kind of on, I'm a newbie to your group. I mean, I've been watching you guys on Facebook forever, and I love your posts. They're, they really give me good energy, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much. I'm a landowner down here by Fond du Lac, and I have approximately a 30-acre, what I call CRP prairie. Okay, so CRP allowed me to plant prairie grasses and prairie flowers, and that helps keep the taxes down because it's in the CRP program, which is that's a real benefit. But I know that's not, remnant, and it's not moving a remnant forward. I have probably about 39 different varieties that we seeded. And I think 5 or 6 grasses. I got a real wonderful stand, frankly, of little blue stem, which I love. And right now it looks gorgeous, even in the wintertime. But anyway, what I'm wondering about is I have reed canary, I have red twig dogwood, and I have willow, because the area is low area, and that's the only reason CRP allowed me to do it anyway. How, or do you guys have some source that I can go to find out how to control the red twig dogwood and now the willow even more? We've been mowing the red twig dogwood now and the willow. I mow it like in November, which is not a lot of fun, but nevertheless, I mow it in November to get it down, which has allowed the flowers to continue to grow. So what I'm looking for is, and I really don't want to take up all your time here, but I'm looking for, is there some source or some place that I can go to find out about trying to control those 3?
Kathy, do you want to help him with that?
Sure. I'd recommend the Lower Chippewa Invasives Partnership. They have a website and contact information, and then suggest what your issues are, and we can give you some recommendations about how to control those.
So that's Lower Chippewa
Invasives Partnership.
Invasives Partnership. Okay, great.
Uh-huh.
Because one thing about what I have, I realize, like I said, it's not a remnant, but nevertheless, it really has promoted in our neighborhood here, people's interest in the prairie. And I have this wandering path that I've mowed through it. And so I invite people to come walk the path and to kind of get to know the prairie a bit. Not very many want to, but those that do become enthusiastic. So, it's my way of trying to add to what you guys are doing, which, once again, I think is just fabulous.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, and your site is beneficial for a lot of insects, probably for some grassland birds.
Oh, yes. I get bobolinks.
If you were, if what you had was a actual remnant, I sometimes get in arguments with my other prairie friends, because I often take the argument of, I haven't seen a prairie yet that doesn't have shrubs in it. And so why are we wasting all this effort going after these native shrubs? But, sometimes they're just not desirable, or they're in the wrong place. Mowing will probably be a good thing, but that organization will tell you about what your options are for herbiciding. That might be the way to go.
And I just remembered another thing. Are you guys interested in what might possibly be remnants that we don't know about?
Yes.
Because, I'll try to email it to you. There's a place in Richland Center. My college roommate used to own the area, and we hadn't been there forever. And we went over there for an event, and my goodness, there's the side of the hill, and I know the lower areas have been farmed, but I don't think the side of this hill has ever been farmed, as best I can tell. And it was last spring, it was just so chock full of native prairie flowers and things. I really said to me, gee, this might be a remnant, and I don't know how I check out whether it really is a remnant or not.
Yeah, well, there's a very active group in the southwest section of the state, and Gary Eldred, who's the founder of the Prairie Enthusiasts, you can't stop him from going to look at places like that. So I can assure you there'll be some qualified people go take a look at it. Yeah, please send us contact information. We get a hold of the landowner, and some people can take a look at it with his permission and see what happens.
Yeah, oh, it'd be my pleasure. It's in Richland Center, which is really more northwest.
Right.
Mark, can I slip in here? You know, I mentioned the Lower Chippewa Invasives Partnership about shrubs, but you know, I just want to echo what Mark was saying. And Mark, maybe you can talk a little bit about prairies have different goals. Different kinds of prairies have different kinds of goals. You know, about what and it makes a difference in whether you have shrubs or what plants you have. And you know, when I first met you, that was one of the things when people would say they want to create prairie, you know, one of the things I would hear from you is, you know, well, what's your goal? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What, you know, are you wanting grassland birds? Are you wanting pollinators? What are you wanting?
Well, it's part of the question is, you know, are there specific goals? Like at the Seymour project, we really want to encourage a lot of lupin. But you know, one of the things that I've learned as an ecologist is that, you know, there's no template for what a place is supposed to be like. You know, a lot of people pull out John Curtis's book, The Vegetation of Wisconsin, and go to the tables in the back and go, this is what a prairie is supposed to be like. And I'm like, you better read that book, because the whole point of that book is that no two places are alike, and no place is alike every, you know, through time. It's all constantly changing. And so there's, and so we should just keep that in mind. I know some of the very finest restorationists are just like, let's whack it with our management, let's burn it hard a few times, but let's see what happens. It'll be good, whatever it is. I mean, for me, the goal is just to protect populations of native species, and you start with the plants. The insects are probably still there. Bird management is a whole entire world, and small mammal management is an entirely different game as well. And so anyway, I'm starting to ramble. Did I answer a question?
Yeah, that was fine.
Anybody else? Carolyn Carr, you're going to give us a word of wisdom?
Not a word of wisdom, but just note that you're looking for green milkweed, and I know there's some at Cynthia Lane's Goat Prairie Remnant. We saw it this year, so you can add that to the list. Of
No kidding.
Yeah, and
So,
we saw only one plant, just like you said. In fact, as you were describing that, I was like, wait, that's exactly what I saw. And we looked pretty hard. But your advice to make species lists is like, okay, we got to actually do that.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate the idea of how to collect data. I think that's great. And I wanted to just put a plug in for this. This is a book that's a few years old by Chris Helzer. And he's going to be the speaker at TPE's conference coming up. And this is the Ecology and Management of Prairies in the Central United States. He works for TPE, or works for the Nature Conservancy down in Nebraska. And he works on huge acreages, but owns a small piece himself. And he writes about heterogeneity. That's the thing that matters, which to me is kind of like species diversity. I mean, what he's saying is that if you create these different conditions on the site, it allows different species to do different things at different times. And you'll see that change, and you'll create that more diverse landscape. And we have CRP and their rules. Every 5 years, you got to burn the whole thing. And that's really frustrating to me. I wish there were a way that people who wanted, like us, people who want to have a better prairie can do that, comply with CRP, and not have to just exit the program completely to do the kind of management that I think ought to be allowed. So that's a little campaign. I don't know that it'll ever succeed, but meanwhile, we're trying to figure out what to do. Because for instance, we were advised by people who are going to do our burn this coming spring that we ought to control the Canada goldenrod that is very present and thriving and bringing plenty of insects and is native. but it's really there. We ought to control it by haying twice, 2 years in a row, like mid-August as soon as we can. August 16th, we should get out there and hay the entire 8 acres. And I'm like, you know what? I don't think I can do that in good conscience. Like, it doesn't feel like the right choice. So anyway, these are the kinds of management questions I think are really hard. So any advice?
Quick
That's a
comment
very
about
big
the
question.
CRP. This year, they're saying mow the whole thing. I just re-upped again for 10 years. They're saying mow the whole thing. You don't have to burn. They know I want to burn. So the part that's really wet, I mowed this fall, and then I will burn about half of it next spring. But so at least they're listening. But what they won't listen to, and I've been trying really, and I'm hoping other people have some impact with them, is to talk about diversity with them. They had that whole thing about planting 2 or 3 different varieties, and that's it. Turning over things that you'd put into grass, that they took, and then just planting goldenrod. And now what I'm hearing you say is they're saying do something about your goldenrod. I don't know how we get any influence with the CRP.
Yeah.
For me, the only thing that really does, I know it doesn't bring remnants back, but what it does is raise the level of interest with other people who have never really experienced any form of prairie whatsoever. And they begin to get a view of what kind of beauty and naturalness and, all of the wildlife that's there. So I think there's a real benefit to it. Are we at all as a group involved with the CRP people and trying to influence them?
Well, it's interesting that you should ask, because we have a grant from the NIFWIF, and part of what we're doing is we've hired a consultant to work with people who are primarily in agriculture, and I'm sure that will lead to discussions with CRP, both the private landowners and the agencies that are regulating those. Whether it would actually have any impact in legislation or rulemaking is a whole different issue.
Thank you.
Well, back to Carolyn's question about goldenrod, that can be really tough, and I have not seen any sort of magic bullet on how to deal with that. I mean, in small areas, like in my yard, I can pull it in the middle of the summer. And then I step back and go, I'm not going to get this all done. There's too much of it. And so that's not particularly effective. I think in the long run, and this is hypothetical, that a lot of these clonal species, I mean, they have a lot of advantages. They get in a good spot. They pump all their energy. They grow laterally. But eventually, they're going to deplete something that they need, or some pathogen is going to hit them and wipe them out. And I've read that there's a insect that is a problem to Canada goldenrod on the East Coast, but we don't have it here. And the other thing I've been wondering about is that there's a number of named varieties or subspecies of Canada goldenrod. And is it only some of them that are a problem and some aren't? And I haven't been able to figure that out. So I guess all of that is to say it's a mystery that somebody else should be working on.
Pam, go ahead.
Yeah, I personally, just from what I've seen, the main problem is Canadian goldenrod. I don't see any problem with showy goldenrod, stiff goldenrod, or Oldfield goldenrod. Those, I think, they're late bloomers. They're great for pollinators, and I don't see them taking over. It's mainly the Canadian goldenrod that I've seen that's a problem.
Right.
at least around here.
Right. We have another question, Mark, from the chat. What do you recommend as the next step for work on on Carl's prairies and savannas?
Well, I was hoping Carl was going to join us. He's not on, is he?
He might be.
Yeah, he's listed as on. Carl, do you want to?
Yeah, Carl, are you there? Carl and I are hoping to set up probably a chainsaw party or two later this spring. And I don't know, it's, you know, our chapter's been so busy. There's so much to do at Dobbs and so much to do at Seymour that we've been really sporadic with some of the private landowner projects. And, you know, Carl's isn't the only one, but you might have got the impression correctly that I think Carl's is a gem, and that I would like to see.
I think we lost Mark there a minute. He'll probably come back on. And
See,
Carl,
this
if
is
you are,
area where we have already done some work, and I'd like to be doing more there as well. So anyway, we are going to schedule a work party or two, and Carl is now retired from taking care of several hundred head of cattle, and he's got more time on his hands, and anybody who wanted to go down there and work on their own could make arrangements with him.
and Carl, if you're listening, another thing to do, if you haven't done this already, is to get on the schedule of having Dan Carter come and walk your prairies and talk with you about your management issues. And he's certainly someone who could help you figure out next steps for different parts of your property. Dan Carter is someone that TPE hired under the NIFWIF grant, and he's a wonderful biologist and plant ecologist, and he's working with private landowners. So if any of you have your private lands and you would like to have an expert come out and walk your property with you and remind you of certain things that you have, or just have discussions about management issues that are particular to your place, Dan is a wonderful person to do that with. And then after he visits your property, he writes up what you talked about, and also if you have specific questions, he'll address those in his write-up. So if you need to get in touch with Dan, you can find him on the TPE page, or you can contact me and I will help you get in touch with him.
Yeah, we're
Carol,
trying to get Dan to Carl's place this spring.
Oh,
Carol
good.
Jean, Carol Jean, there's a question here from one of the participants saying, could you point me toward information on how to conduct an alpha quality survey? I don't know if you could see that one, Carol Jean. That's why I'm interrupting.
No, I actually can't see that.
Yeah. So Mark, could you?
Oh, on the methods for replicating the methods that I was using?
The alpha one.
Alpha.
Yeah. Well, I use some sticks that are a meter long, and I lay them on the ground. And I do it in a haphazard way that avoids bias, meaning I don't avoid the thicket of prickly ash, and I don't avoid the poison ivy, and I don't walk straight to all the pretty stuff. The limitation is that you need to be able to identify almost everything that's in your plot and name it the species. And there's not very many of us who can do that. And I used to be pretty good at it, and I haven't been keeping up. So I'm not as good as I used to be at it. I think we need to be encouraging college students who are taking plant taxonomy courses to do some of this work for us. I've been thinking about making a proposal to the chapter that we raise enough money that we can fund a student research project for an undergraduate or a graduate student, that part of their project would be going to some of the sites we talked about today or some other sites and collecting data in ways that were similar to the ones I presented today. So I don't know, does that answer the question? Maybe. So, no.
I did, I'll answer too. I did one on my property that was very simple. I went out with small poles and a measuring tape, and I had 16 poles that I had that I pounded into the ground in a meter square, and then I put like that orange tape so that I could find them again. I made 4 of those on a planted prairie that I have, and I did 4 of them on a prairie remnant that I had. And like Mark, I just wandered around and miscellaneous put them. I didn't pick it for any particular reason. I tried to get different spots with different things in them is all. And then Mark and I and another professor walked the property and identified what was in each of the quadrants. So it's pretty simple. And then if you leave the sticks in, then you can go back to them a few years later and see if it's changed. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
We're new to the group. We're just kind of exploring this a little bit. We've come into some land just south of town of Eau Claire, where I've got almost 20 acres of basically old field that has not been farmed for years, that we would like to make into a prairie more. There are some native species out there, I think, and we're just wondering, I was just wondering, these projects that you're working on, how big of acreage are they? And does it matter how large they are in terms of whether it's worth trying to restore a prairie?
Somebody else want to answer that one, or should I?
Well, go ahead, Mark.
Well, there were a couple different parts to that, and being close to Eau Claire, I think some of us can probably come up and take a look at your study.
Oops, hold on a minute.
Yeah, can you mute somebody?
Hello?
That was probably me. I'm trying to get on with my phone.
Oh, that's
Okay.
Carl Morsbach.
Carl, can you just hold on a minute? We're answering another person's question and then we'll get to you, okay?
Yeah, he's muted.
Okay, go ahead, Bradley. Or no, I'm sorry, Mark, you were answering some of his questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think you need some expert advice to see, some of those areas around Eau Claire that are on very sandy soil. Those are the easiest sites to work with because there's not that much plant competition. And sometimes a lot of native stuff remain depending on how long ago, last time it was plowed or whatever happened to it. I mean, some of those sites, they went very light on the herbicide or never herbicide it at all. And so it might be you have a lot of the fickle plants there already, or maybe maybe it's like that old field at Dobbs where it's mostly just a bunch of junk and might as well start from scratch. So first I'd have somebody take a look at it, and then the size question, and for plant and insect conservation, bigger is better. But if it's something that is going to be partly for aesthetics, it doesn't really matter if it's for bringing in pollinators. I think any addition to our landscape of wildflowers is going to be beneficial. So I just think if you've got an interest in an opportunity and you can have fun with it, you should go wild.
Well, we had a small spot that we call our prairie that we acquired before this last bit, and we put out a number of prairie grasses several years ago, and it seemed like nothing really happened for the first year or two, and now all of a sudden there's stuff clumps all over the place.
Yeah.
Our planted lupin, and that really took off, but it doesn't seem like it's quite as robust the last year or so. I don't know if it backs off a little bit, but we have pretty sandy soil there. There was a natural burn there, I guess about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, on that larger patch that we've acquired. So we see bits of stuff all around, but it's not real lush by any means. But so it sounds like from what you're saying that even smaller patches of 20 acres, which I consider a small patch if I'm thinking of a prairie, I guess, because looking at your numbers there, Carl's land was 240 acres, and he had the largest number of species, obviously. So, but it seems like it's worthwhile trying to work on that stuff.
Absolutely. I posted in the chat, Bradley, Dan Carter's name and his email address. And if you're interested, you could contact him about setting up a visit where he could come and take a look and see whether, what you've got there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. By the way, that's a free service for private landowners funded by your tax dollar money.
So,
okay, Carl,
Carl back on?
Yeah, Carl, do you want to go ahead?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, Carl.
Hello. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm gonna have to put up a camera and audio on the on my computer so I can do this Zoom stuff at some point. But yeah, there's a number of goat prairies. We just I sent Mark a couple of pictures of one that I'm trying to open up now that's I think is exciting. I can't get to it. I can get up to the goat prairie that's in the picture. And then I used to have trail all the way around the farm. It's probably a mile or so to get over to the other goat prairie on top of the hills. And that storm that came through knocked everything helter-skelter, and I can sort of get over there, but I can't get out to the point where the goat prairie is at. And my neighbor and I were going to go up there and just cut it open so we could get the side-by-sides and the ATVs and that out there. It's hills, so Mark was asking, well, is there an easy way to get up there? No, there is no easy way to get up there. But I've accumulated a number of back seats out of vans, and I'm going to try to take one of my little trailers and put maybe 4 of those back seats on that trailer, so I can hook that on behind the side by side and drive people up there.
What a great
'Cause
idea.
it's a chore to get up there. But
Yep.
yeah, I kind of saved it going out to this new goat prairie as a project for TPE and people that might want to come out and, I mean, use your chainsaw. And I don't have a problem using my chainsaw. I use it too much. But I think there's a lot of people that don't have that opportunity to go do that. And some of you that have been to some of the earlier things, we got I mean, I can drag a picnic table over there and a bench and the barbecue grill and this, that, and the other. So, I mean, if we were to make a day of it, you know, we could throw some brats and burgers and whatever on for lunch. And it's
We'll work on getting that
lots of-
scheduled.
huh?
We'll work on getting that scheduled. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, people say, well, what's a good time? And I got to say, you know, I live here, so any time is a good time.
Right.
Well, and it's well worth getting up to, I don't know what we call it, the original Goat Prairie, because it's a really good example of an intact dry prairie. And how far is it to Minnesota from your place, Carl? Because you can easily see the other side of the Mississippi River from there.
Yes. Ella is the old time when they ran on the rivers and that. So Ella is 7 miles up from the Mississippi River and 7 miles down from Durand. You know, because everything was on a 7 mile thing, because that's how far you could walk in a day when you were trying to go back up and ride some more lumber rafts down.
Interesting.
So it's probably 10 miles or so down there. And yeah, you from the prairie that's in the picture now, you can look right down river and see Minnesota. And that prairie, we burned that again last spring. And it's got a pretty nice take on it. That's about the third time we've burned that. And that works out well because we burn it in February or so when the snow's every place else. But I mean, like a goat prairie, the sun shines on that and that gets all dried off and, you know, and all nice and ready. And first thing in the spring, so you can fire it up and you don't have to worry about it. I don't put in any fire breaks or anything. Just runs. Get the day when the wind's just in the right direction, blowing towards the river, and you fire it up on the other side, and it all burns over the hill.
Carl, is that new site that you want to work on in the blowdown? Is that accessible in the winter, or do we need to wait till spring?
No, that's accessible.
In the winter?
I guess, yeah, it's accessible now unless you get another foot of snow or something, you know. And then the problem is to get up there. Right now, I got to go over to my neighbor's and come up through his one of his trails to get to that trail going over there. But I can. That's a short way to get there because it's right next to Bear Pen Road, and that we could go up my normal road that goes up to this Goat Prairie, but then we got to go clear all around the hills, probably a mile over to the other.
Right.
To the other side.
We can have some more conversation with this offline here. Does anybody else have any more questions about Mark's presentation?
One of my questions would have been, Mark, you were talking about getting data and that. Are there kids in Stout and Eau Claire that are into this plant stuff? Are there classes and students and all that?
Well, there's some. Of course, students don't stay around very long. So what we need to do is have more rewards that get their attention, I think.
Yeah, but couldn't they go out and do this plant sampling and the stuff that you're trying to get done? I mean, couldn't we pay them to go out and do that?
Some of them we could.
Well, and some of the issue is, Carl, that they have to have the experience to be able to identify the plants. We've had really good participation from students at Stout at Dobbs. They've been wonderful this winter, coming out in force and helping with work parties at Dobbs Landing. But whether or not they actually have the knowledge to do all the plant ID work, I don't know. That's another issue, I think.
Yeah, one thing.
Well, possibly. Go ahead,
ahead.
Mary.
Oh, well, I recently learned that the plant taxonomy courses at Stout are going to be held more frequently than they were before, and they're encouraging the students to take them earlier in their college careers instead of taking them at the last semester when they don't really do us any good. So I'm hoping that because of that, we're going to be able to get some students to really get interested in plant identification, and we could have some projects for them. And if we had a stipend, maybe that would make it more attractive to them. Maybe it's not necessary. But anyway, I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to attract some more students who can do the plant identifications, and then that's a skill that they can just keep developing, and they may just be able to do it for the next 40 or 50 years. And the groups like the Prairie
Well, what can we put up
really
for?
benefit from it.
What can we put up for a prize or encouragement to get them to learn that stuff so that they can come out here and do what we'd like them to do on the properties?
Yeah, well, why don't we put that on the agenda for our next chapter meeting?
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, we can do some crowdfunding in that. I don't think it'd be a big problem to get some dollars assembled to make I say prize, but it's probably the wrong word. But a reason for them to say, hey, I think I'd like to learn these plants, and my objective is to go out and do that project.
Yep, that'd be great. I hope we can do that.
Well, let's just do it instead of hoping.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? We've been at this a while now, and I know the folks may have other things they need to get done tonight. I just want to thank you all for coming. It's been fantastic, and keep watching our Facebook page and our emails from the chapter, because we're planning on doing these more frequently.
That'd probably be a good idea.
Well, good night, everybody.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciated this tonight.
Well, thank you.
And also, if you have topics that you would like